Hey everyone, welcome to the round 5 recap of the Over the Board event that I played this last weekend. If you are just interested in the chess, you can jump ahead to this timestamp over here. If you've been here for the journey and you're interested in carrying on and seeing what the setting was for this round, then you can hang around over here. If you've been following along, you'll know that the first 4 rounds were on the Saturday, so this is now the 5th round. It's the first round of Sunday. It's not too early, but it is early-ish, earlier than I'm usually up. I did have a good night's sleep though, and I was partly expecting that this might be a bye, but I ended up not getting a bye, so I was assuming that this was now my last round of the tournament. If you're confused about the bye situation, I'll explain that in the next video because that's when the bye starts to cause a little bit of drama. So what happened was I was paired against someone who I've played a lot of games against before in the past with varying successes. Sometimes I win, sometimes he wins, sometimes it's a draw. So an experienced opponent, someone who's going to be quite tough. But as I say, I'm well rested, I'm happy going into the game, and I'm ready to give it my all because it's my last round of the event. I had the white pieces for this matchup, so I started with e4, my opponent played c5, I then went from that standard knight f3, they went e6, d4, takes, they played knight to f6. I remembered to defend the pawn this time. And then after they played d6, once again, for some reason, I thought that this was the Najdorf. I'm not entirely sure. Clearly, I just don't know my theory at all. And so I went bishop to g5, and I was like, cool, this will be great. I can go f3, I can go queen f3, queenside castle, bishop to d3. This is my usual setup. Everything's great. It's a nice, attacking game, and I'm quite happy playing this. So my opponent then played bishop to e7, and I just played f4, carrying on with the plan. And then they played h6. And here I paused and I was like, wait. I know I've played this a bunch in online chess, but in online chess as well, not everyone's playing accurate moves. A lot of us just go into autopilot, myself included. And so usually I just will automatically go back to h4 because you don't really want to give the bishop up for the knight. But then I started seeing that if I went back here, I was calculating out then knight takes over here. I can take over here. If I don't take over here, let's say I take here. I'm not very happy with this at all. I have to go g3 and I just feel like they're doing a lot better and I'm down a pawn. And once again, I have a situation where I have no pawns in the center. So after that, I have to then take here. They then take here, attacking my queen. And then I was thinking, if I take, they take, and then I was thinking they're attacking the b2 pawn. So let's say I go over here. Sure, they take, but I lost a pawn. I'm not entirely sure if I'm happy being down a pawn like this early in the game. So I decided against this, and I was also looking at other options. I was like, can I move my bishop out or bishop here and try trap their knight? Does this work out? And the defense that I actually missed. So the best thing seems to be to go to c7. I looked at c7 thinking of attacking the knight. I didn't see that if they then take my b2 pawn, I can capture on d6. I just didn't see that that pawn was being attacked. And then if they try to move their knight around, I have quite a nice position. They can't castle. I'm now threatening to go to c7. So this is all what the engine suggests. They even suggest then knight a6 is the best move. If you move the king across, it's also not looking great at all. I didn't see this far. I just thought in this variation that I'm going to end up losing a pawn. So I thought for a really, really long time here, trying to be like, can't I go bishop h4 there? I know in my Najdorf theory, I go bishop h4. And the reason is because that's actually a Najdorf. It's not the situation over here. So eventually I decided I wasn't just happy with that risk. So I took on f6. They captured back. And I was like, I'm not entirely sure what to do. I can go bishop to b5. I thought, let me try and stick with my Najdorf plan. So queen to d2. If they take over here, I'm still defending the knight, but I'm also getting out of the way to queenside castle. So after they played knight to c6, I decided not to actually take the knight, because if I take over here, they can take back with their c-pawn. If I castle queenside, they have an entirely beautiful b-file that they can just put their rook on and attack on that side. They've also got an extra pawn in the center that can maybe help them with future pushes. So I don't really like that scenario, but my knight is being attacked, so I have to move it somewhere. And I thought b5 is actually not too bad, because I thought it's attacking this over here. I thought if you defend it, I get to queenside castle and there's not a way to add another defender. And I'm also potentially hitting the c7 pawn in future. So I was like, maybe I'm just going to win a pawn here. So I was feeling quite happy. I was assuming that my opponent would probably do this over here, because then I have to go back with my knight, and we've now traded off a bishop and a knight just in a different order, and things look fairly equal, which I'm happy with. Instead, they went back to e7. So I wasn't expecting this. I was like, well, I think I'm just winning a pawn, and I am just winning a pawn. So queenside castles, they decided to just castle to get out the way. You can notice that there's no other way that they can defend this pawn, and I have 1, 2, and 3 attackers they only have 2 defenders, so I'm going to win this pawn in any case. So my opponent decided, if I'm losing a pawn, I might as well just castle, get my king out of the center towards safety, and I then captured the pawn. I sadly can't delay it, because sometimes it's nice to delay things, but over here I can't delay it because if I do, I give them the chance to just threaten to bring their rook across, and then it gets a lot more dangerous for me to take the pawn. So I took here, they took with the bishop, I took with the queen, and unsurprisingly, they decided not to trade queens because potentially my king might be attacked. You want to hang on to the queens in this scenario. There's also a possibility that after rook to d8, notice that it is very defended, so the knight and the queen are both defending it. After rook to d8, there's a possibility that maybe my queen has to go all the way to the side of the board. So let's say I play bishop d3 and try and connect my rooks. I then, after rook d8, have to go all the way back to a3 to save the queen. I don't really like my queen on a3 at all. And then another thing is, if I don't do that, let's say I go like, I don't know, let's say I move my queen out of the way right now, and they then attack it. Then if I move my queen out the way, so to this place, they can just take over here, and it's ideally I'd like to take with a rook. So what I decided to do, if we just go back over here, is I thought, let me just prevent all of this so that my queen isn't on d6 when the rook goes across to d8. I'm going to go to d2. So after rook to d8, I can then go bishop to d3. And I really like this move because it's, well, first of all, it's blocking the attack of my queen. Secondly, it's defending the c2 pawn. And thirdly, if I can get this pawn out the way, it's going to be pointing towards the king and it might help in some sort of attack. So I quite like the bishop d3. They then went knight to b4. And I thought, ideally, if they take over here, so let's say I just make a random move. Ideally, if they take over here, I want to be taking back with like a queen or a rook. I don't want to take back with the pawn. Obviously, here I can't take with the queen because the rook captures back. So I thought, let me instead go queen to e2. So if the knight takes, then I can take back with the rook. And I'm quite happy with this situation. Remember, I'm still up a pawn, and the more pieces we trade, the less chance there is for me to make any mistakes. They instead decided to go bishop to d7, trying to get their bishop along this diagonal. So I played over here. I was initially looking, you know I'm impatient, so I was initially looking at playing like g4 or trying to go for something like that and getting some sort of attack going. But then I realized that after rook a to c8, there's a lot of pressure, and I've played a lot of these positions before where it's very, very safe. Like, it's something black doesn't even have to think about. They're able to just give up the exchange, and the king's in a little bit of trouble. So if black were to get an extra move over here, if it was black to move, and let me just push a random pawn, or even let me attack the knight over here, but regardless, what you can do very easily is you can go rook takes c3, and here actually the engine suggests that the best move for white is taking with the pawn, which is, I don't think, something that I would have really figured out over the board. I was just looking at takes over here after knight to a2. Notice that the queen's attacking these squares. So my king is then forced to go to d2. And I stopped calculating over here. I was like, this is bad for me. This does not look good at all. Black can just continue the attack. I mean, I didn't calculate this out. But queen to a5, you're going to get this pawn. I was just thinking as well, my king is... I mean, it can't go here, it can't go here. This pawn is weak. In an endgame, this is going to be quite a strong pawn. My bishop is now pinned. If I was like, maybe a move like this is a possibility. I wasn't happy with this at all. So all the way back in this position over here, after bishop to d7, I realized what was going to come in future and that I wasn't happy with that. So I thought, let me chase the knight, because the one possibility is they go over here. And this we should be fine with. There's no pin over here. Just notice that, because I can take it with the knight. Actually, there's a nice little tactic over here that if they do try to go to b5, and it's always a good idea to try and give your opponent an option to make a mistake, or the opportunity to make a mistake. So if they do go to b5 thinking, okay, cool, I'm going to try exchange something, knight takes, if queen takes back, we have rook takes d8 with check, and after rook takes d8, I just win the queen for free. So I thought, let me just give them that opportunity if they do decide to take on d3. My opponent, though, did not take on d3 and went back, and I was very happy with this because with the knight on c6, the bishop now can't go to c6. And black's pieces aren't like really well coordinated at the moment. My king's also not in the happiest place, so I want to try and disrupt black's pieces as much as possible so that my opponent doesn't have a chance to try and launch an attack, which will absolutely destroy my king. And I also have a lot of time to carry on with my attack with things like g4, h4. What I decided to do first, though, was I decided to go e5, just with the idea that, first of all, I'm opening up things for the bishop. So maybe like queen e4 here is a move in future, with the idea queen e4. Obviously, my opponent's going to spot it. It's classical chess. But after they go g6, that creates a target for me. Maybe I can go h4, h5. Maybe I can just come back, reroute, and attack the h6 square, which now isn't defended. But generally, when you're attacking your opponent and it's opposite side castling, whenever they have to push a pawn in front of their king, that's a weakness that you can attack. So e5, looking at those sort of ideas, I was very much expecting, not like that, I was very much expecting knight to d4. I didn't know how I could stop this though. I didn't really see any way, so I did a danger check just to see that I was going to be okay, and I decided just e5 and let's see what my opponent does. So sure enough, knight to d4 as I expected, and now I had a little bit of time to think, and I was trying to figure out, should I go queen to e4 and just go for this anyway? After queen to e4 though, I was a little bit worried, I'll admit. There were a couple of things. So one thing was, what if they just maybe block with the knight and then they're going to do this? What if they block with the pawn and do this? I was even considering, can they go bishop c6 first? Because I don't get checkmate. I see now that I do actually win a pawn or two. I don't think I calculated this far. I think I just thought, well, I'm not really getting checkmate. Their pieces are getting a little bit better. Also, maybe they can also go rook c8 and start an attack. And I just didn't see a knockout blow. I thought that their king could survive. So I decided in the end to not go for this move. I had to be very careful to avoid something like this. So important to see that my queen is undefended. So this or this, it's pretty much the same thing. The knight can go here with check, and after I take back, queen takes, and my queen is undefended. So I did keep that in mind and made sure, because I did momentarily, I thought, could be quite nice if I can like pin their queen, because I think I'm okay with this. I can maybe even carry on with an attack if we trade queens, because I do have these pawns that I can push towards the king, and everything's pretty safe with the bishop on d3. So I considered these moves briefly, and then fortunately I saw that that was blundering the queen and decided not to do it. And then I opted to go from e2 to h5. And here I was thinking, okay, possibly I'm supporting or going to go g4 and then g5 when this is now a threat once again. This could be good as well. I was thinking if I can open up the f file at some stage in future, queen on h5, I'm hitting this. And I'm also still just defending this square so the knight can't go check at the moment. And also, if the bishop moves across over here, my queen's not being attacked. My opponent did then go bishop to c6, and yeah, I did make a bit of a mistake, although neither me nor my opponent actually realized this. I went rook to g1. I thought this was quite a normal move. I did see that my rook was being attacked by the queen, but I was like, well, that's very, very defended to try get the knight out of the way. I thought my rook's defending my rook as well, and I don't see anything that you can do with the queen. And this makes a lot of sense, because first of all, I'm moving out of the pin so that my g-pawn can move. And then secondly, I'm just getting a rook on the g-file so that if I do want to go g4 in future, I'll be able to do this. And what my opponent and I both missed is knight to b3 is quite a strong move, because the idea here is that if I take, then you can take on d3, and I can't capture back, or if I do capture back, you take back over here. And now my king safety is not looking as great as it once was. My attack is also not looking as great as it was, because I've lost my bishop on d3. I've also lost my g1 rook, so I don't have the same like rook behind the pawn that's being pushed. And yeah, just looking a lot better for my opponent now compared to what it was previously. And they should even be able to possibly get back the pawn that they're down. So fortunately, both of us did miss this, but it's something that I should try and keep in mind in future and just look forward a couple more moves, because it's not a super complicated tactic, but it's something I just didn't even consider knight to b3 just because everything looked so well defended. This is also just a good illustration of how pushing a pawn creates a weakness. So I've played a3, b3 is now a weakness, whereas if I still had a pawn on a2, I could just capture back and this wouldn't have been a tactic at all. So my opponent instead played rook ace to c8, and now I realized that I had to be very careful. So I'm a pawn up, sure, but the pawn that I'm up was opening up the c-file to my king. My king's not in the greatest position. My attack isn't really going anywhere. I mean, I can't really play f4 over here because possibly bishop to f3 or the knight getting in isn't looking very pleasant. As soon as the bishop moves out the way, I mean, even just here, the sacrifice on c3 becomes possible once again. So not enjoying this, my attack's not doing too great. And I thought in the end, let me just try and do something. And let me play f5. With the idea that I'm trying to open up the f-file. I'm not busy allowing the bishop or the knight to go to f3 at this stage, so if the bishop wants to move out the way, I have time to kind of respond to it. Whereas in contrast, after the bishop went what would it be? I think this one. When the bishop goes to f3 over here, it's attacking the rook. So I don't have time to like save the knight or defend over here. I have to deal with the rook. Whereas over here, f5, if the bishop moves, I don't know why it would go there, but let's say it moves over here, I have time to, if this is a problem, sort that out. And if this is not a problem, to carry on with an attack. Something like f6 is starting to look really, really strong because you can't push the pawn. I can go h6 and I'm getting mate over there. And even if I didn't have that, I have bishop takes g6 and things are looking quite good. So my opponent opted to take and I took back over here. What's important to note is a couple of moves before I even pushed f5, I did notice that this was a continuation. Obviously, you have to look and see what happens if my opponent just takes. So I did see that g6 was a possibility. And once again, I probably should have calculated this out a little bit more. But when I was calculating towards this position, I realized that I'll be able to sack on g6. I'll be able to get at least 3 pawns for my bishop. And I'll probably get a perpetual check. And that's something that's often comforting when you go into a line, especially when it's been quite a like double-edged position in terms of, even though I'm a pawn up, I haven't been clearly winning. There's definitely chances in every move I was having to check and see, does my opponent have any attack that's going to win? It's not a relaxed situation where it's just you can close your eyes and get the rest of the win. So it's quite comfortable to then go towards a situation where I knew worst case scenario I should be able to get a draw. So I took over here, my opponent then took back, which is basically after my opponent played g6, that's, in my opinion, that's the same as a draw offer, because here there is just a perpetual check. The idea is that the king can't go across here, because then, this is what I looked at. So I looked at this. Okay, I see you can block it. I didn't see this move over here. I was just thinking, check over here, king goes across. That's the only move. And then I was thinking here and here, which is also not the most efficient way to checkmate. This is just checkmate in one because the pawn is busy blocking off that square. I didn't calculate this in the game. I just thought this was okay. Whereas I see now that this does defend with the idea that takes, and I have to be careful because my queen is not the happiest. Should still be winning though in any case. But so my opponent went to king h8 instead. I thought that was forced. I didn't think f8 was a possibility. He might have also thought along those lines. So I took the pawn over here, went to king g8, and this is when I had a huge think. Because I'm in a situation where I don't think that my opponent can go to f8 if I check on g6, even though if I had a closer look at the position, maybe I would have figured out that they can go to f8. But by my opponent going to h8, I'm kind of assuming he also was just maybe looking at a repetition. So my decision now is, do I offer him a draw? Well, play queen g6 and then offer him a draw and just go back and forth. And that's not the worst situation for me. I've had a decent tournament. This is a tricky opponent. I thought it was my last round of the tournament, so I'm like, well, then I'll be done a little bit earlier as well. I'm happy with my performance overall. As a return to over the board chess, it hasn't been the worst. But then I was also thinking, maybe I have an advantage here. So sure, I've invested a piece. But I've got 4 pawns for that piece, and even if we just if I can trade off the queens, and I can trade off maybe, let's say the 2 rooks, and even the knights, I might still be winning this game because I have so many extra pawns. I have 4 extra pawns. These are connected pass pawns. This is a pretty far advanced pass pawn as well. If I keep a couple of minor pieces or a rook or 2 on the board, I maybe have even more chances. And I was thinking, is there a way for me to win this? And I was also trying to think, am I happy if I carry on playing over here and then lose the game compared to going for perpetual check and getting a guaranteed half a point? And these are all the considerations that go through your mind when you are playing over the board chess. Whereas when you're busy playing a blitz game, you don't have 10 minutes to think about this and be like, am I okay accepting this? Can I play on? How do I feel? Like generally online, it doesn't have stakes as well. And after a very, very long thought, I thought, once again, I've said it in the previous videos, I came here to play chess. Let me carry on playing. Even if I lose this, I can look at it from a learning experience and learn how to do the attack better in future. Because I'm pretty sure that I do have an advantage here, even if I'm not entirely sure how to convert it. So I opted for rook g to f1. So this move over here. And my idea here was potentially that I can maybe lift the rook and try go for a checkmate. I can maybe lift the rook like here and go across and try go for a checkmate like that. I thought rook on the open file, it seems fairly standard. I'm not entirely sure what else I should be doing. If you look at the engine, it actually recommends a whole long a whole long line with the king going across, and then you like ladder your king, or you go across to the queen. There are lots of ways to win this position. Apparently rook g to f1 is just not it, because my opponent has bishop to e4. I didn't see this at all. So what I spent a lot of my time calculating, I was trying to look at, apart from just the considerations of a draw or not, you obviously have to evaluate the position. So maybe let me chat about that a bit. A big thing that I was worried about was, I thought after rook to f1, I'm giving them a free move because it's not check. So they get a free move. And I did notice that when the bishop moved out of the way, that my queen was going to be attacked. But as I said earlier, I thought that if I was able to do a queen trade, I was going to be fine with that, because I should be I should hopefully be winning the endgame, or at least have drawing chances in the endgame. So the big thing that I was looking at was, is there a way for them to try and attack my king? Because if you look at c2, c2 is quite weak. So the knight's there, the rook's there. It's not currently defended by anything except my king. So if this gets out of the way, if you may be able to add another attacker or two to c2, I'm starting to look as though I'm in quite a lot of trouble. So knight to e2, for example, and I spent a long time calculating this line. So I was looking at this, because the initial problem that I saw with this was, I was thinking, what on earth happens? So let's say take here, take here. I was thinking, what on earth happens after bishop to e4? Because now my queen's being attacked, first of all, but there's also a massive threat here. And I see the engine says that the defense is rook to d6. This would stress me out so much, with like rook over here. This is not, even though the king is very safe because you don't have a check here, and you don't have any checks over here, and you just have no more checks. I don't know. I looked at just taking on c2. I didn't see this rook defense, and I was thinking, this is not great for me at all. I was thinking, if I now take the queen, the problem is they have a check over here, and now I'm actually losing this position, and I just couldn't see a defense over here. So even though the computer finds a better defense where you can go the rook d6 and you just up so much material, didn't calculate out that line. What I looked at instead was, I thought after I take on e2 and they go like this, bishop across, what I could do was I could go queen to g5 check, and then after the king moves, no matter where it moves, let's say it moves across here, I was just going to look at playing c3. Which, once again, I'm glad to see it is winning according to the engine as well. And that was my, when I found this solution, I thought, okay, this is fine. I can carry on playing. I can play rook f1, and that's all completely okay. So after I played rook g to f1, I now had 11 minutes. I had started the move, like after, what was the move before this? After queen takes h6, I still had probably like 22, 23 minutes on my clock. By the time I had decided that I didn't want to offer a draw and I wanted to carry on playing, I now had 11 minutes left on the clock. So not ideal. I had not a lot of time, and my opponent still had over 30 minutes on their clock. So I'm at a massive time disadvantage now. My opponent played rook c7, and I was like, oh my goodness. And all of my like really, like, it was serious calculation. In all of my serious calculation, I'd only been looking at moves like knight b3, the knight e2 that I'm showing you now, like weird bishop moves. I'd only been looking at things like that, even maybe like bishop g2, and I hadn't even just thought of the simple like bring the rook up to defend the 7th rank. So that I was a little bit disappointed that I missed such a simple move, but I decided as well it wasn't going to cause me too many problems. And what I did here was, once again, after quite a think, I found the move rook takes d4. The engine thinks that the best move over here was rook to f5, with the idea that the knight can't take because then the rook takes over here. I did spend quite a bit of time trying to think, like, how can I make this work with a rook lift? But I just kept on coming back to the thing where I was like, if I move my rook, there's probably this. I don't know if this leads to like more problems. Now when I take over here, I have to take with the king, and I just couldn't make a rook lift work like that. This, of course, doesn't work because that's covered. And I looked at this move as well. I can't remember what I thought was wrong with this one. Possibly I was still looking at ideas like this, or maybe like knight b3, the queen getting into g1. So I just wasn't seeing how this was, how I was going to survive this and make sure that my opponent had no counterplay. I didn't have enough time to analyze this very deeply. So instead what I saw was then rook takes d4, thinking if the rook takes over here, I just get checkmate in 1. Which is great, the game's over. It doesn't matter that I don't have a lot of time. And if they take with the queen, I noticed then that the rook is now undefended. So if I go across here, they can't move the queen out of the way because then I just take on d8. because a lot of my calculations previously had kind of been working on the assumption that I might be able to get a g5 check, and then my rook and the queen would both be attacking this. Maybe good things would happen. But then I realized over here, after initially looking at queen g5, rook can just go across, and now this is defended by the queen once the rook has moved away. But after I'd noticed all of that, then I found the move rook takes d4. My opponent took back on d4, and I went across rook d1, and they took. So now I'm in a better situation in terms of, for once, it's me who has the queen, not my opponent. And I didn't blunder my queen in this game, or in the tournament yet, so we were quite proud of that. So after knight takes d1, I thought I was probably going to be okay, because I was thinking I should be able to hop my knight over here, and then it's defending c2. It's still tricky though, so my opponent has 2 rooks, I have a queen, I'm up how many pawns? I'm up 4 pawns. But there's counterplay. There's definitely counterplay for my opponent. The one thing that I was banking on though is I saw that this pawn could be quite strong and cause a little bit of chaos. And also at the moment, the rooks are a little bit disconnected. So I thought possibly I might be able to get something happening. So let's say they take over here. I can go check over here, and you can't just block like that because I take this. And yeah, so you can't take this pawn, so I hang on to that. If you double up your rooks, then we'll see what we can do. So that's exactly what my opponent did. And I went knight to e3, which is also very conveniently defending the square that it came off of. So there's no d1 checkmating threats. And then the bishop went to e4, which was a little bit of a strange move. I wasn't necessarily expecting it, but it didn't cause any problems because by now I had had enough time during my opponent's turn to try and figure out what I could do. This wasn't a situation where I was busy like singing songs while my opponent was busy playing. I was like hectically thinking and trying to see what I could do here. And I thought of the idea e6. I calculated out, I think, the rest of the continuation from here. By now I had 6 minutes left to my clock and my opponent had 23 minutes. But I figured that no matter where the rook went, so if it went over here, I'd be able to go across and attack these two. And then the rook has to go here to defend it. I can then hop my knight to f5 and I should be winning. And even if my opponent doesn't move the rook over there, just pushing on e7 is going to cause a little bit of a problem, because even if, let's say, the rook goes just randomly over here, I think I was thinking over here that I can probably go... I was thinking I could possibly even just push the pawn. The bishop here was a little bit annoying because my original plan, if the bishop wasn't here, is that if the rook goes across, I have the very nice move queen to g6 check. We just imagine that this doesn't exist because I'm attacking the rook, the king can't go closer, so I just win the rook over there, and that's all great. But after rook g7, so I do have queen to h4 attacking the bishop, attacking the rook. They go here. Oh, so knight f5, that was my initial plan. And then I realized, actually, it's a little bit stronger if I push here first, because I should be able to win the... I think I was going to be able to win the rook for the knight, and I figured I should be able to win another piece at some stage as well. So push the pawn over here, king went across, I went knight to f5, now I'm busy forking the 2 rooks, and if the rooks move... well, yeah, forking the rooks, so I'm going to win one no matter what. And took with the bishop, I took with the queen over here, and I'd calculated that I was threatening to push this. And also, so if we go over here, rook takes g2, this is the move that was played. It took me quite some time to actually come up with the move queen to d5, because what I was expecting, and I said this to my opponent afterwards, I was expecting them to go over here, and or to take this potentially. So here I take the bishop. If they go here, then I'd calculated this, and then king goes back here, and then takes over here, and this is what I calculated out quite a few moves ago, that I'd get to a situation where it was queen versus rook, I'd still have an extra pawn or two, and hopefully I'd be able to defend my h pawn and then just start pushing it and get another queen. So that was what I'd planned. I didn't even see over here that I'm also hitting the rook. So after I played this move, my opponent just resigned. But it was a really nice game in terms of no matter what I did at the end, and I calculated this out quite a few moves before, and didn't have to have that much time in order to do it. I think I ended with 4 minutes on my clock. My opponent was down by then to like 15 or so minutes, and I calculated I was just going to get a winning endgame. So I was super, super happy after this that I actually hung on to the game and carried on playing, even though I had the draw on the board, and I would have still been okay with my tournament if I had accepted the draw essentially, or just gone for the draw over there. So I was really happy to have carried on playing, had a bit of faith, and actually tested it out. It's always nice when you carry on playing and you manage to get the win, because it's a little bit frustrating when you carry on playing for another hour and then you end up getting a draw anyway. And it's even worse when you decline a draw offer and then end up losing the game entirely. But easier to play them from a learning perspective, because then there's less pressure if you do end up losing the game. So as far as I was concerned, I finished my tournament then on 3 points out of 5. I was like, that is 60%. That is something that I'm very happy with. I was not expecting this. It was a tough field, and I thought I was just done with the tournament and I was going to get a bye, but that was not the case. So if you're keen to see what happened in round 6, there was a little bit of drama regarding the byes, and I'll explain all of that in the next video. You can check it out. I'll link it over here once I have released that video, and in the meantime I will put a playlist as well so you can go and check out the previous games if you missed those. But thank you very much once again for watching, and appreciate you being here. I'll see you in the round 6 video.